I'm on DSL. Do you remember DSL?
DSL. Wow, that's a blast
Yeah.
from the past. You look like you're on the ISS in 1996, but you sound great.
So this episode, I don't know. It's gonna go sideways, I think, because like accident. All right, welcome to People vs. Algorithms, show about detecting patterns in media technology culture. I'm Brian Marcy. I'm on a DSL connection. Actually, I'm off the DSL connection, but I've arrived in Serbia. They're having a little bit of connection problems, but that's okay. Anyway, how are you guys? Troy? You look annoyed.
I'm not annoyed, Brian. I'm doing great.
Okay,
I'm
good.
doing great. I'm going to a nice event tonight. Going to have a couple of cocktails, hang out with some friends. It's a nice day in New York, Brian.
Okay.
It's a good
I had a
outlook.
Nikshichko by accident. I'm flying. Alex, welcome back. How was your 50th birthday?
It was good. Spent it with a lot of friends. Went to Disneyland. Shaved my beard by mistake.
You went to Disneyland for your 50th birthday?
Well, yeah, it was one of the things. Wanted to do that.
That's actually creepy.
I love Disneyland, man. I didn't get to go as a kid, so we went. I mean, we
Are
went.
you a
We go there a lot
Disneyland
with
adult?
our-
There's nothing wrong with it.
No,
There's nothing
no,
wrong
I'm not a
with being a
Disney
Disneyland
adult.
adult.
I like rides. I like Six Flags.
But did you go as like a character with a tail and a muzzle or something? What did you do?
A muzzle? Yeah, I went. I dressed in a sexy furry outfit.
Yeah, you dressed as Cinderella?
No, you do it. You know, California Adventure has, so they serve cocktails and you go on the fun, roller coaster rides and you try some of the old classic rides. They're really nice.
Did you stay in a theme hotel?
No, we stayed at a Hilton.
I did
It
a
was good.
speaking gig one time at Disneyland and stayed there solo. Nothing creepier than a solo adult man. Just
Solo
going
would be
around
rough.
Disneyland.
Solo would be rough. Yeah.
yeah.
As a
Wow.
group, it's kind of quirky, but solo would be rough.
I liked how they had a lot of like little chairs in the lobby. They had these little teeny chairs because
Small
They
kids
need them.
chairs. Yeah.
How do you take it in, Alex? Are you processing it sort of ironically, or are you really enthusiastic? Like, what's the energy coming from you and your team, your crew?
I think it's an
Like, this is all
Yeah.
adults, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've done it with kids before as well, but that was just like the way I can only say the way I take it. I appreciate Disneyland and the kind of artistry that goes into the technology and how they've upgraded some of these rides and just the overall kind of management of all these people going in and out. And I appreciate the charm of some of these older rides and the thrill of some of the new fast ones. They're kind of exciting. So that stuff's fun.
Did you do the Avatar ride where you fly around?
That's not in California. I mean, it was also next door to where we were. So, it wasn't like, we flew there to go to Disneyland. It was just like a thing we did one day. It was fun.
All right. Well, it sounds super suspicious, but
It does sound a little suspicious.
Well, you have a little bit of joy in your heart. And
I don't think we want to leave too much of an evidence trail here. I'm off a week on a Croatian island. I went in a different direction, Alex. Got to be honest with you.
that's nice too.
Croatian
man. I
islands
don't-
are amazing. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Hvar, I highly recommend Hvar to anyone. So I heard this like crazy story. I put it in Field Notes, but I just want to so there's this island that is basically 90 kilometers off the coast of Croatia. It's closer to Italy than it is to Croatia. And they have a lighthouse on it, and there's just a lighthouse. It's uninhabited. And they have two guys that live there full time. And it's just like you take 1 month on and 1 month off, and they're just totally self-sufficient. They live off the land. They fish. They've got chickens. They grow vegetables, and they do their little tasks. It's got to be a crazy life. I'm glad that they're there. I don't know if I'd want that life, but good for the Croatian island of men. We got Field Notes praise from Brad Robertson. He said, Field Notes for me is a top 3 place, I don't know what his other 2 are, of smart/thoughtful curation in my news/information daily diet. The strength in community and the right touch of moderation/quality. As a fan of PVA Pod, this site is the perfect complement between each episode. Trey, that must warm your heart.
Very motivating, yeah. Not only that, there was a lot of positive reactions to his comment. Yeah, it's cool. I think Field Notes is cool. But,
yeah, you got to sell it.
Well, I added a feature, Brian. I don't know if it'll work or not. I always wanted a call-in line. So I built one. And now, in addition, the whole thing's built off of SMS. Now you can call the same number and leave a voice message, and it, logs it in the admin section. And we can use them on the pod. So I think it'd be really fun to get people calling in and leaving comments or, sharing thoughts of any sort. So I'm very excited about that. And per your request, I built a new Venn game, which I think will be very fun.
All right. So everyone should go to pdanotes.com. Linda is also seemingly showing signs of developing sentience. You guys tangled a little bit this week. That was a little uncomfortable. That's all part of the process.
pvanotes.com. It is constantly evolving, very fun, and a great community,
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about Anthropic? I was kind of surprised by this. They came out that they're watermarking AI writing. And this is in reaction to the European Union is going to regulate the shit out of this. I mean, they're forcing people to attach the cap to the water bottles. So they're going to regulate AI like nobody's business. This to me, it confirms that, AI writing will continue to carry a social stigma. All these people, are worried about the fact that they use AI as an assistant in writing or in things like copy editing. And I don't know, my takeaway is that we're still feeling our way into what it means to use AI in authorship. And what was your reaction, Troy?
Well, it came because of a need to appease European regulators. And my first reaction is Europe should quit trying to protect people from themselves. And this is on par with the GDPR gaffe. I think that there are so many use cases primarily in which people use AI as a tool and could be, it could be confused for, AI writing, because I just think it'll be a wildly imperfect process. And I think it kind of denies how the tool's evolving as a creative partner. So, it's the false positive case. I think prompts have value. I think that the creative energy that goes into using a tool is important. It's your prerogative if you want to take shortcuts and create content in different ways. And this is going to lead us to, I think, a discussion around, how we're thinking about AI music. And it might even lead us to a discussion around this guy, Bobby Fingers, whose work in creating these incredible YouTube videos kind of goes completely in the opposite direction of shortcutting with AI. But I just think that, winding through the regulatory hurdles of governments around the world is really difficult for these AI companies. And there's going to be much more to come in terms of how it's managed by a frontier company in particular. And I find it kind of annoying, to be honest.
I was interested in your point about Suno and about, I think you called it the last sacred thing. And that music is a better AI argument than what you called another debate about AI email, which I think shortchanges writing as a word cell, because I'm long writing, actually. I think people are going to get so sick of being surrounded by all this AI slop that writing is going to be more valuable. Actually, real writing. But I'm biased.
Do we, I think we don't really know how the watermarking works, but it definitely requires there to be a substantial amount of text, and then it'll kind of, generate the text with a pattern that is technically recognizable. I agree that this is not a great solution. I agree that provenance is probably more important when it comes to things like music or audio in general or video in general. We're at a point now where it's impossible to tell if a video is real. There was a TikToker that had this prank that he did where he showed people in a library. He took a photo of an old man and then showed a video to people that worked at the library of that old man like screaming in the middle of the room, and they called security, and that even when the guy said it was a prank and AI generated, they wouldn't believe him. And it's kind of getting to a point where I think we're going to need to figure out, I think people are going to just want to know if things are real or not. They're going to want to know if the things that they're listening to on Spotify are real or not, watching on YouTube. It's becoming harder and harder. Now, the counterpoint to this, and Ben Thompson is very much on the same side. And like the counterpoint to this, like, oh, Europe keeps meddling with it, is like, yeah, I mean, we have AI companies also constantly trying shit out and messing with, fucking with society and fucking with all sorts of things. And we put that down as like, well, we're just experimenting and learning. And I think that there needs to be some sort of counteracting force, and that force might overreach and might decide on things that don't work. But what is the option otherwise? Do nothing? Because you got to try some stuff out and some of it won't work. But like that's happening on the other side too.
Right.
Don't you think? Like,
I don't. I disagree. I mean, I think they're doing nothing isn't what I'm suggesting. I think pointing your energy at things that matter is what I'm suggesting. And I think in music, I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't listen to Suno-generated AI music all day long. I mean, do we freak out when, 10 Swedish producers and some writers create a song for a star who just stands up and sings it? No. I mean, music exists along a continuum from that which is AI created, community creative, and, a singer-songwriter, playing guitar and writing from the soul and the heart. I know what I want to listen to. I know what kind of human source, music that is this kind of unique bird singing that I cherish. I know what's important to me, but like music it means a lot. People like different things. And, to me, Suno is an IP issue with record companies and artists. And that's a kind of legal issue that needs to be navigated so that we can ensure that the people that make things are compensated. That should be fought out in the courts. But like, as to suggesting for a second that people shouldn't enjoy what they enjoy, whether it's, a Chinese microdrama that has AI characters or machine-made music or an essay that someone wrote with AI, I don't care. I really don't. And I think that the
you
market
don't care about provenance? You don't care about...
Well, I do.
Yeah, I don't know if that's... I do. You do care. I don't know if we're going to become like China. I mean, and I don't think that I don't know. There's obviously a different point of view in China about provenance and about the use of AI, and that's fine. They're a society in a rush. And I don't think that it's very transferable to our societies. Like, I don't think we're going to become just like China. Like, I just don't believe that. I don't believe that we're going to want to watch micro dramas where the actors are fake. I just don't think so.
Yeah, I wonder about that though, Brian, because we also said we weren't going to shop from live videos. And that was, 5 years ago. And now we do.
But whether we do or we don't, right? Like, I mean, the question becomes like, do we have the right as consumers to know the ingredients that go into our media consumption? Like that, I think that's, fine. Follow that feed if you want, like watch only AI slop if you want, or have a mix of it. But like, I think that it becomes tricky when, you're consuming a product that's becoming indistinguishable, that is also based off a lot of copyright material, but like, let's not talk about that for a second. But as a consumer, I want to know, I want to know if it's real. I want to know if that podcast clip that I see on TikTok is real or fake.
But Alex, if it's indistinguishable,
yes,
reminding someone that it was made by a robot instead of a human is, I just don't. If it's indistinguishable, I think that the human creative product needs to change.
But that's not entirely true, right? Because I think that if I buy a cup, and there's always the cup example I give. If I buy a cup from IKEA and it's a $2 cup, I'm willing to pay $2. If somebody sells me that cup and says it's handmade and charges $20 for it, right? Even though it's the same cup. Like, we don't exist in this world where everything is qualitative, right? Like, we apply more value to things that humans make, which is why, if you watch a video of street magic and then you find out that it was edited, the value is much less. Like, you don't want to be lied to. And
right, but look, think of all the creative tools you use today, Alex. Do we disclose that you used airbrushing from Photoshop on a piece of creative? No, of course not. These are just
that is
tools.
very different. This is very different. I think.
Yeah, this seems like a slippery slope, Troy.
Yeah.
Danny in Field Notes, he asked if we moved from post-authorship to post-truth to post-honesty as a virtue. And he said that it feels like we are living through a moment where deliberate misinformation, bold and inaccurate claims, and even straight copying of other people's work or code is being rewarded more visibly than ever. Is this just old behavior amplified by the algorithms, or has something fundamentally shifted in how we value originality and integrity? I'm more on the side of the latter. I think this has been a drip, 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 and I don't think you can disentangle this from AI. And I think that people want to know where things come from, and people do care whether something is quote unquote real or not.
And I think consumers deserve it. Like, I mean, I think this is different to saying like, well, this is just like drum machines in the 80s or sampling. And I'm like, no, because I knew that it was drum machines and samplings. In this case, this is a prompt. You don't have a sense of provenance. You can make any songs that sounds like anyone. If anything, just to protect our creative arts, right? Sure, you have to create different content. Sure, you have to try to expose your process so that people see the value in it maybe more. But when I'm listening to a stream on Spotify, these companies are entirely incentivized in sharing, AI music that they don't have to pay royalties for. And as a consumer, I think we deserve.
Well, I highlighted the royalty
Troy,
issue as an important.
But it's not only a royalty issue.
issue.
I think it's a consumer choice issue, because I can guarantee you that like a vast majority of the people, if you make them listen to a song which they like, and then you tell them that it's AI, they will like it less.
I guess what I'm struggling with, Alex, is the difference between disclosing that your milk is organic, or that, in other words, made by AI, right? Like, this thing, this image, this song, this video, whatever, was made by AI. And what happens to creative authorship in the future, where we're surrounded by these tools that become a fundamental part of every step of the process, from ideation to creation to verification to publishing. And I think it's going to be really, really hard as these tools just kind of weave themselves into how we work. And so if something is, if disclosing that something is AI is important to people, I think that's kind of fine, actually. But I just think it's going to get really tough, in particularly, and this highlights it in the case of text, where I use AI as part of my creative process, and now it's going to label something that could completely discredit me. And I still think that there's kind of creative provenance in the process of making something. I'll tell you, I can disclose that. I'll give you another example, Alex.
But I can
I'd like
live
to
with
know
that.
how you feel about it.
Sure.
It's like Field Notes, right, is made by AI. But it's definitely not made by AI, meaning there's a billion decisions in here in how I focus the technology, in what I allow, what I don't allow, in how I make design choices, in what functional choices I make. But underneath of it, it's completely enabled by AI. Is that different?
Code is not the same. We're not talking about I think you're mixing things.
I think that code, specifically because of the way it works and the history of code becoming, I think, to me, like, AI is closer to moving away from, assembly, which was the language that would talk more directly to the chip, and moving to compiled languages like C, which would compile into assembly. And now, the history of coding has been like, learning and building languages that are easier for humans to build stuff from, and not really understanding the code that gets compiled. And I think we're going there with AI. And I do think that's different. I agree with Brian. I feel like the conversation is different. I also think it's different to use AI as a way to kind of like fix some of that writing you're making or use it in research. I think it's very different to generating a song on Suno. And I'm willing to live with this discomfort of things being caught in a net as we try to figure this out, right? Because everybody's like saying like, well, sure, we got these AI companies running rampant, and sure, they took over they ingested all this IP, and sure, sometimes Suno can make a song that sounds exactly like Usher, but they're working these out and they're changing things and they're adjusting things. However, legislation comes out and it's not perfect, and everybody goes like, how dare they? How dare they do something that doesn't work exactly as it should in this like world that changes so fast?
I understand, and I kind of agree with you on some of it, Alex. I've seen misapplied regulation to changing technologies that basically accelerated the decline of the media business.
Right.
And that's GDPR.
But European regulations also means that like we have,
you think GDPR accelerated the decline of the media business?
100%. Yes. It added unnecessary costs to media businesses. It's an extra click for everybody that wants to read a piece of content, particularly in Europe. And all of the platforms that you're competing with don't have to do the same thing. Because once you're authenticated on a platform, it's a global setting.
Well, look, I mean, I do agree. Government regulations, I'm not pro GDPR. We can argue whether government regulations are the best way to get there, but let's just move off this for a minute. I thought Lulu Miservi, who is kind of the comms whisperer, like hit on a really important point on a recent podcast with David Senra. She said everything seems fake now. And I think that's what we're getting at. She said every launch is using the same slop cinematic video, the same template. And then you go to half of them and you go to the engagement and it's completely fake. You just pay for engagement and retweets and all of that. And I think that is the sort of underlying feeling that's more important, leave aside like the mechanics, is that we are slipping into this period where I guess the information space is now a completely low trust space. You're just assuming that everything is fake. You're assuming that there's something else going on behind the scenes and that it's not actually as it's being presented. Maybe that's more of the same, but I think that's a important point. Hey, did you see that Meta is back in the AI race? Mark Zuckerberg dropped a 6,500 word essay, which now you have to mention how many words it was because that confers some kind of importance that he was able to produce 6,500 words with or without the help of AI. And he is strongly coming out as American open source guy. And that Meta is apparently readying the release of a new model that will prove that it isn't wasting all of this money like it wasted it on the metaverse. Alex, what's your takeaway?
By the way, does anybody believe in Zuck's, humanist manifestos? No. Right? Obviously, they're self-serving, but you run a company, right? Like, obviously.
Yeah. He just came down from like betting the bank on the metaverse, and I don't think he has any sight of what people want in the future. And it kind of makes me laugh when, they have kind of these tech leaders have these like very bullish, calls on like jobs and what it's going to do with create an age of abundance where nobody will need to work, but at the same time, everybody will want to work more and money won't matter, but we need all this money. None of this makes sense if you kind of tear it apart or if you kind of look into it just a little bit. The only thing that makes sense is there's obviously a PR push that's been done where people are saying, stop talking doom and gloom. The only thing that people are saying is you're firing a bunch of people and we're talking about like a potential end of the world, right? Start showing people that it might help them, right? So now it's like he's talking about personal super intelligence. And now AI will augment people rather than replace them after they fired, tens of thousands of people. And then the third piece is definitely like, hey, there's this energy behind open weight models, and everyone that doesn't have a winning frontier model, that is everyone that isn't OpenAI or Anthropic, are now fully in on like open weights, open source models, and taking advantage of the progress that's been happening in China. So I don't trust his product instinct. I don't trust his motivations. And I also think that nobody's ever going to use fucking Meta's AI because people, every single data point we see says that people don't trust that brand and use these tools because they don't have a choice. And nobody wants to put these glasses on their faces with cameras.
Well,
So
can I jump in, Brian? Or
Yeah, of course you can, Troy.
I mean, I don't think we're meant to trust leaders of corporations. And I think that obviously this is self-serving, and Zuck is the most relentless founder or operator of any, large company. He sees a lane, right? Open source allows me to catch up. Open weights gives me an opportunity to catch up in a race that is defining for any large technology company or any technology company right now. And he's like, I'm going to go after it. So he writes an essay that connects personal empowerment, government tyranny, curing cancer, American leadership, and wanting to distill other people's models. So it's so obvious as a path for anybody in his, sort of strategic position that it absolutely makes sense. I don't really give a shit whether or not it's self-serving. That's just what people that run companies do. I used to spew bullshit when I ran a company.
No, of course,
about the future of a media company.
It's like the question is like,
Wait,
you'll
you
use
talking about your media OS, the media OS?
No, that was pure.
Bullshit?
That was pure poetry. What I think is really interesting in a bigger picture is how important AI is sort of existentially to all of these guys. We have Elon doing this sort of awkward 30-minute presentation in front of all the SpaceX people and saying the same things that Zuck's saying, basically. And he says SpaceX is an AI company. There, he's out with it, right? That, engineered intelligence will eclipse organic intelligence by order of 1 trillion. It's just a function of our ability to channel the energy of the sun. And that 99% of our revenue will come from AI. We're an AI company. And so that's kind of where we're at now. Everybody needs to be an AI company. And at the same time, for Zuck, oh my God, they're the cigarette company. So there's real trouble on the home front because the next lawsuit's in the trillions, not in the billions or in the millions.
Yeah, he's not going to roller skate away from what happened in the social media era. And also, nobody's forgotten about it. I mean, I don't know if he thinks that. I guess he thinks he is relentless, and I think that is possibly his greatest trait. I agree with you that we should stop trying to say are these good guys? It's like no, they're billionaires running massive companies, and so we shouldn't expect more from them. Yeah. But there's definitely a lane for an American open source champion when so much focus is going to go to the Chinese open source model.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is true. I think there is, I just don't want people to become passive and just say not read these things because I said, it's all going to be self-serving bullshit. Of course it is. But if you read between the lines, there's 3 big topics now. I think one is that I don't think Zuck is good at reading where this stuff is going. And I think they're responding to a backlash on AI, especially when it comes to media and their feed. People, the fact that AI slop might take over Instagram's feeds like it did with Facebook could accelerate, its slowdown. 2, the push to open models could be a real threat to OpenAI and Anthropic because everybody else wants to go to that, and China has proven that it works. And so I think it's just you can glean some information that isn't interesting from that, even though it's self-serving. Of course it is.
Yeah.
This is Kremlinology because we in Web 2.0, we had. There was this idea that it was going to empower the underdog and all this, and that's all out the window now. It's we're waiting for SpaceX to drop a new Grok assistant. NVIDIA is talking about turning compute into financial instruments with BlackRock. I mean, they're not even pretending that this is not a completely centralizing technological development. And I think that is behind a lot of the backlash against the data centers. There was a really interesting podcast with Jasmine Sun. Yes, I'm a big fan of Jasmine Sun. And she was tracing it back to, data centers are really part of people distrusting big corporations. And we talk about big corporations now. We're talking about technology. So it's time for the overall technology industry to stop pretending that they're the guys in the garage. They're not. They're the baddies now. America rightfully has always distrusted big centralizing organizations, whether that's government or big business. So welcome to the party. You're going to have to deal with.
Before we are, so completely dismissive of the things that Zuck's accomplished, Alex, I think that we should just recognize that he's made some extraordinary moves over time, beginning with understanding that Facebook needed to be a better tool than MySpace. It needed to be more efficient and faster and just, a more effective place for people to connect, right? He won that battle. Secondly was the insight to buy Instagram, which was the best investment that a corporation has made in a long time.
Yes.
And then there's the purchase of WhatsApp.
Sure.
And then if you look more specifically at Instagram and WhatsApp, you look at, the evolution of those products.
Yes, I understand. But with the amount of data, I've worked pretty closely with some folks from Meta, from Facebook. I think it's very clear that Zuckerberg is not an idiot. I think that, but I also that with the amount of data that they have and the amount of money that they were generating, it would have been crazy not to buy Instagram, seeing what was happening. It would have been crazy not to buy WhatsApp when the...
But he did it, Alex. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, he did it. But however, when there was no data and he was just looking towards the future and his own instinct to it, he spent, $80 billion on the metaverse and renamed his company. So it's kind of sometimes when the road turned right, he turned right. That's great. He didn't crash out. But when there were three forks in the road, he took the wrong turn. And so I get it. I still feel at some point, there's this version of a CEO that's too big to fail, where you can make 100 wrong decisions. As long as, one of them is right, it's going to pay off. And I feel like,
Alex, what about Google? I mean, Google had this cash machine, and for a long time, all of its other bets categories were all duds. They're all duds. They tried to do Lively, there's some social network, immersive stuff. They tried to do so much stuff, and then they did Waymo, and they did they've done a lot of interesting stuff. Then
sure. The problem with Google is that it's a consortium of different groups that have different ideas, all rotating around a business that generates so much money that anything else, even successful, looks like nothing. However, they did come up with, they have a great cloud business. I think Gmail and, the Google Workspace stuff is huge. It's just the problem with Google is the early success problem, that they have one thing that made so much money.
But it is far more than that today. But anyway, you know what? It does lead us to the evaluation of another mogul, which is Elon. And I think
same shit with Elon. I know you.
No, but let me finish, Alex, please. I think that after failing to slow down or arrest the progress of OpenAI, I think you'll see him make huge progress on taking share in this world. And I think what he's really good at is kind of building these really complex vertical systems around a product, right? So in cars, it's manufacturing and batteries and software and charging. And in rockets, it's like rockets and satellites and an emerging communication system. And then Grok. Grok is like this Grok bot is connecting the model, compute, the agent harness, applications, and data sets. And I think that he's going to pick away at this. And I think that Grok is going to come out of this as a really strong competitor.
You sound Elon pilled. I'm sure.
He did make the Cybertruck.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be there's always going to be
you know
the
what?
cyber,
Like, there's always going to be the Cybertrucks. Like, 4 weeks ago, he said that SpaceX would be worth more than Earth, and then today or yesterday, he told everyone that AI would be 99% of SpaceX's revenue. I mean, I don't know what happened to the space hotel or colonizing Mars. I think the thing that happens is when you have a lot, maybe that when you have a lot of money and a lot of reach, once again, you can say a lot of shit and try a lot of things and respond to things really quickly. It's kind of, once again, hard to fail. But I'm not a believer. I don't think anything really is like come to fruition. And I don't think that he's building data centers that have a bunch of GPUs in it, and Grok has zero market share. So I don't know how you plot a line from here to there, but maybe.
Let's see.
I wouldn't count them out. Can one of you explain what's going on with NVIDIA and this idea of turning compute into financial instruments?
Yeah, they want to basically turn it into a commodity where you can kind of rent a unit of compute, which I think would be a server with a GPU in it, into something that you can kind of invest in, like it is an oil future, like people do with.
Like it's water or hydro or oil or, like an on-demand resource that's priced at the unit of intelligence.
The problem with this is that NVIDIA is kind of like controls every piece of that chain, and it's hard to trust them at this stage. And it is such a brittle environment. Like we don't, it's kind of implying that this kind of demand is going to keep going for decades and decades and decades, and there's not going to be any fundamental changes into how we manage inference and learning models in the future. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm super scared of the spend and the debt that's being raised and now financializing these things when I'm not sure we have a clear sense of where this stuff is going. It feels like GPUs kind of are things that will lose a ton of value over a couple of years. Those numbers are just baffling. They don't make any sense to me. There's not enough players to make, like oil is a finite resource, it's available all over the world. It's not like a thing that NVIDIA makes.
Yeah. I mean, Apollo came out with that. I mean, if this, all the margins with the sellers, none of it is with the buyers. And this whole thing feels like round tripping too much. So we'll see when it comes out the other side. Let's talk about media for a minute. I know we don't like to talk about media. I like media, personally. I was talking to this Croatian news publisher, as I'm wont to do. Holy shit. In a market of like 4 million people, do you know how much stuff you got to do to make money? Like she was like reeling off a dozen different business lines they have. They're putting on concerts. They got festivals. They got a content marketing agency. They saw all their auto advertising dry up, so they went to the auto companies and said, "We'll sell the cars. We'll take the risk on. We'll just be a reseller. We handle all the creative and the copy and everything, and you just give us a cut on the sales." They'll do it all. And media itself is really, I think, when we talk about events, like it is really the in-person is the new scarcity. And I think a lot of this is because for the publishing industry, they can't compete in the attention economy. They're not going to be able to they weren't going to be able to compete with every single creator on the planet. And they certainly can't compete with every single AI bot on the planet. So now it's all about like trying to use these brands to pile into the experience and meaning economy and then prop up a few rackets on the side. Troy?
I mean, I don't know, man. I think you summarized it well. I think that in some ways our worst nightmares came true. And that was you're outflanked as a media brand in all ways. And I think we've spoken about that endlessly. I think that these companies are, I guess, resilient like service companies in that they can apply a media brand and some expertise on the human resource to an evolving set of problems to create value. And I think that they certainly don't work at the same sort of, institutional scale that they used to. I mean, these are all themes that we can connect, right? It hit lifestyle publishing first, I would argue. It kind of hit maybe it hit news first, then lifestyle publishing. And the only people that do really well at news today are those with large reporting teams supported by big subscription businesses. So that market's been really thinned out, and it's coming.
Business and finance is
And
the
then,
healthiest part.
and I think B2B media has a better grip on creating value in the market. And then you have the same revolution coming slowly for, the video entertainment business. And I think it's a little bit different because people will continue to pay for, well-produced, entertainment products in a very different way than other media types. But let's just be clear, YouTube is undermining the business proposition of entertainment broadly. I find it remarkable. We'll talk about it in a little bit when we talk about Bobby Fingers. But
let's talk about Bobby Fingers. We can live into Bobby Fingers. I don't know who Bobby Fingers is.
It was shared by someone on PVA Notes, Vincent Murphy. By the way, I shared Bobby Fingers on our old chat group a year and a half ago when I first saw him, and I think you guys ignored me. But it is.
You're licking the cookie.
I regret. I'll set it up a little bit because I did write a couple of notes on it. Because the reason that I would set it up is because, first of all, it was shared by Vincent. Thank you, Vincent. The first video that I watched was the making of a diorama of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's bedroom and the infamous shitting on the bed scene that was discussed in their divorce proceedings. But so Bobby Fingers is a really unique guy, and I think it tells a bigger story about where we are right now, and it'll connect back to the beginning of the episode. But his name is Bobby McGlynn. He's an Irish artist, comedian, model maker, and musician, right?
Yeah.
And he performed, I think his stage name was Mr. Chrome. And he spent years doing prosthetic makeup and model work for film and TV. And his YouTube project is incredibly strange and wonderful in a way that, I sat and watched it with my family, and my son just kept saying, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He makes extremely elaborate miniature dioramas of ridiculous celebrity moments, like Michael Jackson's hair catching on fire, or the Johnny Depp thing,
drunk Mel Gibson.
Fabio getting hit by a goose, Joe Rogan in the Black Keys in the Joe Rogan studio. And he documents them in this beautifully made 20 to 30 minute video that documents his process. He's extremely talented. And then with weird segues, right? So it's super high craft. And by the way, he buries the artwork somewhere and gives his audience clues as to how to find it. And they're really valuable. They've sold for, above $50,000 in the past. So it's super high craft. He's really, really, really a talented artist. Dry narration,
Very funny.
It's mixed, really funny, mixed with celebrity gossip and stuff. Lots of weird engineering problem solving, and this enormous amount of kind of unnecessary labor. You can feel the labor in his work, and he's the opposite of AI generated crap, right? Which is, how it was made is a large part of why it's good. And just this painstaking craft in what he's making. And by the way, he doesn't do volume. He's a scarcity guy, right? He doesn't make that many videos. He has a dozen videos on his channel. He's got 250,000 subscribers and 5 or 6 million total views. And so here's a guy that's just in some way, he's the Picasso of this format, of this strange amalgam of creative talents manifested in a YouTube video. And it's kind of a modern, it's a modern multimedia craft or artwork. When you watch it, first of all, it's really relaxing to watch. And then you're just in awe of the dude's craft. Yeah. And, he made, Alex, did you see the one where he made a boat out of Jeff Bezos's face?
Yeah, no, I watched all of those whenever it comes out. My wife, Melissa, and we make it an evening to watch it. And then, there's also
a Patreon. You guys are amazing. Yeah.
And then you just go to Disneyland.
Yeah, you're perfect.
And go down to Disneyland.
You don't want to do Molly. You want to try acid, maybe. But
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know. What is the best drug to go to Disneyland?
I didn't do anything. People swear on acid at Disneyland, but that sounds like a lot for me.
Yes, it doesn't go down the same way at 50, Alex.
But the idea that the process is the content is actually something that I truly believe in, because that's like true provenance. I mean, it's why we just started, the next game we're making. Video games used to be like, we held back sharing because you kind of, need to hold something back so you can make a deal with a media company so that they have some sort of exclusive, and maybe they put you on their, cover, or their, in one of their specials. I think that stuff's out the window. First of all, like, that doesn't really get you anything anymore. And next game I'm making, day one, we're just going to be sharing the process. Every single thing, every single piece of art we make, how we record sound, it's content.
Yeah, and this is like kind of how BTS is moving from a side dish to the main dish, behind the scenes. Because you want to show provenance and you want to show effort. Like, I mean, if Bobby Fingers, was using AI to do most of this work, I don't think it would be a completely different product. And so you have to choose a lane. I just don't think that there's much of a lane for human creation in trying to compete with AI creation. Like, you can use the tools. Most people use it like just for back end stuff. I just think if you're going to use it as the primary authorship, you're not gonna create a product that is the same kind of stickiness and value that this Bobby Fingers has created.
Well, the process is also like how you think through things and stuff like that. And even Bobby Fingers uses technology and like 3D scanners and 3D printers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I feel similarly like about we've never talked about them, but I think Dropout TV is like a really interesting thing. It's the College Humor guys. They have a real app that runs on TVs, etc. They make all their own content, but a lot of that content, for every show that they make, they have a behind the scenes episode. So every kind of piece of content creates more pieces of content, and then there's all this Instagram stuff. And it's like, it creates a different relationship with the team. They're very open to sharing their whole process. It's changed completely, compared to the kind of the old way of doing things, which was a lot of smoke and mirrors, and you kind of you hide a lot of that process. So I think that's just a shift that's happening in media. And we're developing field notes, right? I mean, I say we, but I mean Troy, with our good ideas, Brian, but we're doing that in the open, and I think people are enjoying that too.
It's part of the process. Just a quick note, there's a new GDP debate. I think this pops up every few years, particularly when US GDP gallops ahead of Europe. There's going to be a backlash to it. And so, there's obviously a disconnect between the headline numbers and a lot of the mood, at least that we see in polling, and at least just by feel, is causing a lot of complaining about GDP as the main measure. Because I have spent the last couple of weeks in Europe, and I am, a fan of Europe, particularly during the summer. And you can't, look, Americans are traveling more than ever, and often they're coming to Europe. Europe is clogged with Americans. And when you come to Europe, it's such a cliche. They have great food. We have poison. Like, there's no two ways about it. It's not about the walking. I've eaten the food here in 2 weeks, and trust me, it's way better than anything you will find in the United States. I was in a little town in Hvar, called Jelsa, and we finished dinner. We walked around like to one of these amazing squares. The thing was built in like 4th century. And all of a sudden there's just opera music playing in a square, like public opera. And it's just like, and the Europeans I were with was like, yeah, okay, whatever, we've got a place to go. And that kind of stuff is it doesn't show up in GDP. And, even JD Vance, as a rank opportunist, is trying to get ahead of this, because I think this is going to be a new talking point, because you have to go beyond GDP in measuring how a society is flourishing. So that is my prediction for the new talking point going into the next presidential election.
It is a good one. And I think that Vance put his finger on something that you just highlighted that's kind of real. So America can be statistically richer while people experience their lives as worse. And I think that's a decent point. The problem I have is when they use it as a way to justify policy in a way that's shameless. If tariffs lower growth, that's fine. National resilience matters more. If deportations reduce output, it's fine. If, I guess, the other side of it's social cohesion or whatever they claim matters more. If fewer women working reduces GDP, it doesn't really matter. We need women at home. We want to put women back in the kitchen or raising kids or whatever. And so I think it's just the kind of opportunism. Once you detach, I think it means we need to measure more, and we need to talk about the trade-offs between the society we want and the GDP we measure. And we don't need to measure less and have a bunch of maniacs creating this kind of whatever they think the world is they want to be. That's about as political as we get on this, but that's where I think it's a little bit
I know. I think both sides
disingenuous.
are gonna have a take on it, and obviously from the right it's going to be more around values and all of that kind of thing, and I think from the left it's going to be like, why can't we be more like Europe? Why can't we have opera in the square?
Brian, related to that, you had some thoughts on how the Democrats fumbled woke 1.0. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. So AOC came out and she kind of laughed it off. She's like, woke one was kind of crazy. And, we're now like, what are we, 6 years in from like the sort of peak of the quote unquote woke era in 2020. And I missed most of it because like I left the office and I felt like if you weren't in the office, like you didn't get to experience like from normal people. A lot of like crazy stuff was going on, but I just always thought I never took it really that seriously. I just thought, oh, this is a fad. It's a weird time and it'll blow over. But we never really had a reckoning for some of the excesses and obviously around defunding the police. And I think everyone's still obsessed about the land acknowledgements for some reason. I don't even know how common that was. And the question I think for the Democrats, because the Republicans are going to try to hang this on them. And they're like, no, you can't get away from the stuff that you had advocated previously, is how they can pivot to talking about the economic issues without marrying them to a lot of the social issues that were front and center in woke and what they are calling woke one. I think Mamdani is providing a great template for this. I mean, his numbers are amazing. He's in the high 60s as a mayor of New York City. That's amazing. And he's the model because basically he's getting shit done, but getting popular stuff done. And he's showing that that there's state capacity to do things. And he's not getting mired in too many. He's gotten mired in a couple of them, too many of these hot button culture war debates. But the Republicans are always going to try to, in this communications battle, are always going to try to bring it back to these culture war issues. And I think the challenge for the Democrats is how they can put what they're calling woke one in a box and focus on the economic issues. I don't know, Alex, what is you've been long on this is all a distraction from class and economics.
Well, what's the question exactly?
Well, I'm just like, my question is like how you think from a communications perspective, how Democrats can get away from the baggage of woke one, because I mean, right. It's kind of set up for them. They should win handily in the midterms.
I think a lot of this, partially for me, I've always believed was a little bit of like social media brain or Twitter brain, where I don't know, was it even that big of an issue? Like on both sides, both kind of the things that people on the left were complaining about and the right, and that they were maybe a smaller minority just yelling at each other online. I feel like people are responding to a new reality where they're seeing Trump just getting shit done that they don't like. Sometimes they might like it, but that they don't like it. And they just want people to try shit out. And it's like kind of like my point with the European Union stuff. Like, yes, maybe we don't like the regulations, but somebody else has got to be a counterforce. Yes, maybe some of the stuff that the new mayor of New York was saying are impossible or actually not that helpful, but he's also fixing potholes and he's also doing stuff like that. And he's got the wind in his sails. People just want to see shit get done, I think, at the end of the day. And I don't know how much of a baggage things are. I think most people just care about what happens to them directly. Like, am I able to afford shit? Are the roads fixed? Is it safe?
I think that's his genius. And I think it's the intersection, the Venn diagram between policies that touch, people in their everyday life and things that you can use as a communication platform. And finding the intersection between those is kind of the magic spot that he is exploiting really effectively. And I even think that extends to the grocery store program, which, is easy to dismiss. But if you spend a couple $100 million creating cheap grocery stores that you can talk about as, an executed policy or part of your policy platform, it's just good communications. And in the scheme of the city's budget, it's a small amount.
And maybe, what's good is that, all the billionaires that threatened to leave if he got elected, maybe might have realized
Still
that
there.
people, they're still there. And also people didn't give a shit, right? It's this whole, I find it really frustrating, this whole thing, like, well, this isn't the right solution. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't have a wealth tax because it isn't the right solution. Instead, we're going to do fuck all. And you know what? I agree that some of these things are not the right solutions, but it's better than fuck all because it gets things moving and it applies counter pressure. It applies counter pressure.
Maybe. I think Americans actually like fuck all. That's why they like divided government.
Hey, but why are you getting fuck all, by the way? Who's getting a lot of changes, like, corporations, right? Like, if you're a corporation, things are great. Like, running a corporation here is fantastic. I wish Europe made it as easily, but I just wish that there was a little bit more balance, like being self-employed, being unemployed, being an individual is so much harder than being a corporation. And I think that's what people are feeling.
Well, we want to make it hard to be unemployed here. Let's be real, because we want people to be participating in the labor force and not to be hanging around.
Oh, I'm with you on that. I'm not a pro unemployment.
I will say I've come around to some European regulations, Alex.
Nice.
Because I'm getting on board a lot of zoning regulations because, I've been to a couple of very beautiful places and Havar just recently, and it's really underdeveloped. You can't get around. I was talking with a real estate developer there, and it's really just about like the regulations. They regulate the hell out of it. And Havar has not been able to overdevelop itself, even though the Croatians want to. I mean, tourism is 25% of their economy.
For it. Yeah.
Like, I asked them, like, do you get bothered by all the Game of Thrones tourists? And they're like, absolutely not. They're usually Americans, and Americans spend 3 times what other people spend. Do you know what tourists that the Europeans do not like? Dutch.
The Dutch? I was going to say the British, but yeah.
No, very unpopular because the Dutch are a caravanning people. They like to RV and they don't spend money. They make sandwiches back in Holland.
They're also tall and good looking, and they sometimes get with the women.
Oh, you think? All these European countries, they all go to different places. Like when I was in Split, it's completely German. Like the entire place is German.
An English guy lamenting the Dutch in Spain, saying we had to get out of there. There was way too many Dutch people.
Well, the English are all into Spain. They're out of like Croatia because they got priced out of Croatia. They used to go there with Ryanair to get drunk and whatnot. But now they're in Spain. They're in Portugal. The Eastern Europeans and Central Europeans, they prefer Greece. Everyone's got their spots.
Yeah, no, and it's great, and I know, Europe's got problems, but...
And you got Disneyland, Alex.
Yeah, I love California. I'm glad I'm here.
Let me tell you, there are no problems in Southern Europe in July and August. Just absolutely no problems.
There are no problems, yeah.
No.
I'm glad you like California. I'm glad you like it there because you have to realize, Alex, that for many times, briefly, but many times I felt guilt for bringing you to California. And now you found, a good life for yourself. You found, the love of your life. You had children. You turned 50. It all worked out. And now you go to Disneyland.
So wait, you didn't want to move to California, Alex? Would you have moved to New York?
No, I always wanted to move to California. I love New York and California.
Well, would you have handled New York? Do you think you?
Oh yeah, I love it. I spent a fair amount of time there. I love New York. I don't like the winters, and I also think that California gives you so much. You're kind of like very quickly you're out of the city, and very quickly you're back in the city. I think it's like no place on earth. But most places have great things about them.
All right, should we get to good product?
My good product was Bobby Fingers, Brian. We're done.
Bobby Fingers. I'm glad you guys got into Bobby. Brian, when you get into better internet, watch Bobby Fingers, and it's worth watching the entire catalog. I think he's incredible.
All right, I'll go to a cyber cafe tomorrow. Watch Bobby Fingers from the Serbian cyber cafe.
All right.
Cyber cafes.
Get to catch up, Brian. Look forward to having you back in the land of Wi-Fi.
I'm going to have Wi-Fi. This makes the Miami Wi-Fi look quite good. So anyway, thanks for hanging with it.
We made it work.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of People vs. Algorithms, where each week we uncover patterns shaping media, culture, and technology. Big thanks, as always, to our producer, Vanya Arsenov. She always makes us a little clearer and more understandable, and we appreciate her very, very much. If you're enjoying these conversations, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It helps us get the word out and keeps our community growing. Remember, you can find People vs. Algorithms on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and now on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.